to get right up in the center. Is that right, Mark?
Sure.
So I'm gonna do it because he's the artist and he ought to know.
Got enough microphone?
I think so. Hear me?
Yeah.
So I'm going to recite a poem, and first I'm going to tell you a story that goes with the poem. And some of you heard a version of this a couple of months ago at the Broom Room, but this one won't let go of me, and I wanted to do a fuller version of the story tonight. So this is the story of a mystic poet died young. And it was put in mind, I was reminded of this guy by the death of Tony Bourdain. And this guy was as different from Bourdain as he was alike, but he was alike enough that the death of Bourdain reminded me of Tony. This story is decades old. It's about Tony Clay. He was a poet, a performer, an occultist. He was talented and charismatic. He had manic energy. He had an infectious, huge personality. He was glamorous. He was a seducer of men and women alike. And I was in a group with him back in the late 80s, early 90s called Gray Pony. And the group was founded by a Philadelphia poet named Christopher Natali Pedito, who moved here to LA in the mid-80s, published some poetry, founded some reading series, and founded this group, Gray Pony. And what we would do is we would do choral poetry performances. So we'd do poetry scored for multiple voices. We put together shows that were about an hour long. We performed at the Onyx in Los Feliz, Highland Grounds in Hollywood, the Espresso Bar in Pasadena, an art gallery in Long Beach called System M, all gone now. And Tony was he was one of the stars of the group. He was really dynamic. And after a year or two of doing these performances at coffee houses, we decided to do a full-blown Poets Theater performance. We did it at a theater on Santa Monica Boulevard in Theater Row called the Igloo, which is now the Hudson, the same space. And the play was called Festival Dionysus, and it was based on the ancient Greek festival that gave birth to theater, which was a festival in honor of the Greek god Dionysus, the god of wine, poetry, and mischief. So who were we going to get to play Dionysus, the star of our show? Why, Tony Clay, of course. It was typecasting. So we put this show together from excerpts from ancient Greek plays, some beat poetry, some T.S. Eliot, some William Blake. We wrote some stuff of our own. It was a great, glorious hodgepodge of poetry and music and movement. And Tony's role was he was going to begin the play by bursting in the front door of the theater, dashing down the center aisle through the audience, leaping up onto the stage, and he was going to deliver Dionysus' monologue from the ancient Greek play, the Bacchae. Because Dionysus' other name, of course, was Bacchus. And Bacchus had a kind of squad of groupies called the Bacchae, and Tony Clay had some groupies of his own, and they played the Bacchae in our production of Festival Dionysus. And so as the weeks went on and we started developing the play, Tony decided he was going to interpolate some of his own stuff into this monologue from the ancient Greek play. And that was cool because we did a lot of that. That was how we worked. Gradually, he decided he was going to just throw out the original monologue completely, and he was going to do his own. And he truly came to believe, as he worked on this thing, he was doing a lot of psychedelics at the time, a fair amount of cocaine, I believe. He was doing some tarot readings and some I Ching, and he truly came to believe that our company, Gray Pony, and this play, and his monologue in particular, were poised at a particular time in the zeitgeist to trigger a global change in human consciousness that would lift the whole human species to a new level of spiritual evolution and help to trigger a new age, a new society built on love and poetry and music and magic. So, a week before the play opened, the night of dress rehearsal, Tony comes bursting in the door. He leaps up onto the stage, and he delivers a very heartfelt, impassioned apology. He's decided he's just not ready to channel Dionysus. He's just not ready to be Dionysus. He needs to go deeper. He needs to do more spiritual work. And I said, you don't have to be Dionysus, you just have to play Dionysus. Somebody else said, you don't have to trigger a global change in human consciousness, you just have to do a decent fucking monologue. But Tony wasn't having it. He was absolutely set. And he went away with his head hung low, and he left a theater company in crisis. What were we going to do? How were we going to do the play a week later without our star, Dionysus? And gradually we realized this was a tribute to Dionysus. You didn't actually have to have Dionysus. Every church service every Sunday is a tribute to Jesus. You don't expect him to drop in and do a monologue for you. So we went ahead with the dress rehearsal. We were cool. A week later, opening night, just before the play is about to begin, the front door of the theater bursts open. Tony Clay comes in, dashes down the aisle through the audience, leaps up onto the stage, and gives his most drugged out, rambling, incoherent version of the monologue he's ever done. And then he goes up to the back platform of the stage to go down the back staircase to the backstage. And by the way, some of you might know Rich Ferguson. He was in the group at the time. He'd actually been recruited by Tony Clay. Rich was kind of pissed off at Tony for this stunt, so he kicked him down the staircase. And he rolled out into the backstage area where I was and some other people waiting to go on. And somebody started yelling at Tony, "You asshole, you selfish, egotistical asshole! What the hell are you doing?" And Tony was shocked. He said, "I thought you'd be happy. I came to save the play." And he stormed out. And many of his friendships with the people in the company suffered a rift that night that was never repaired. Some people remained loyal to him, but still distant. And a few months later, word came back that he was in Paris. I was at a party, and somebody passed around a business card that he'd mailed him. He was hanging out a shingle in Paris as a tarot card reader and a general occultist. He'd had a chapbook of his poems published, and he'd done a pilgrimage to the cemetery in Paris where Jim Morrison and Oscar Wilde were buried. And then, some months later, we got word that he was in San Francisco. And sometime after that, he developed full-blown AIDS, and he was beaten up in an alley in the Mission District over a bad drug deal, and died a few days later in the county hospital. So this poem is Elegy to the mystic poet died young, and it's for Tony Clay. I would say to him, you can be wild and still. I would say to him, you can learn to make your magic without that sack full of tools and toys. I would say to him, you can learn to take up the rhythm of the rolling bellows breath in your chest for your rhythm, the music of the soft hiss of the blood in your veins for your music, instead of being danced and pulled by all that crazy howling around your ears. I would say to him, you can learn to be entranced instead by the altered state of suspension above the bottomless well. You can learn to be entranced instead by the altered state of falling back into the phantom arms of space. You can learn to be enthralled instead by the altered state of coming up slowly through the after image of your own dream. You must become addicted instead to the altered state of crouching in quiet at glade's edge and watching your own thoughts like wild animals in the field. And I would say to him, with the help of luck and trust, you may find that the true voice is the one that will not shout to be heard over all that frenzied motion, is the one that will not chase you down through all that frantic running after seeking, is the one that can be heard as clearly as you may see the paths and lines in your own hand at rest on your own knee when you learn to be wild and still. Thank you.
Jeff Rogers, let's give him another big hand. That was great. Thank you, Jeff. All right, now I have just two real short